third presenter is Dr. William Lawrence, and he has worked in industry for over 25 years as a business executive and industrial engineer. He's a famous man, and his roadmap for rescuing viable enterprises from losses and insolvency featured as the cover story of the May 2011 edition of Industrial Engineer magazine. He has a book that is coming out shortly entitled Business Renewal in Jamaica. This is going to be published by the University Press. We want to hear a lot about it, and he has his 10 minutes.
And thanks for having me. I must say, as I sat listening to my colleagues, I learned quite a bit. I was saying to the chair before the start of the proceedings that the subject of productivity is as old as the hills. And I can't tell you how many sessions I've attended as a participant in the audience on the subject of productivity, and we still seem to have such a long way to go. My very brief comments this evening takes a look at increasing business productivity in Jamaica. And just to advise that for this presentation, I regard business productivity as the value of the output of goods and services from a commercial entity relative to the value of its input resources. There are many definitions of productivity. As you know, my good friend Charles Douglas pointed out one of those, but this is what I'll be using, the value of the output of goods and services relative to the value of the resource inputs. And we all know that businesses depend on the government to set an enabling environment. But I want to focus my brief comments on what businesses can do to help themselves. So you won't hear me speaking much, if at all, about government policy, but I do subscribe to the view that government policy needs to support businesses if they are to be productive in a sustainable way. So I want to talk about two things. One, what's the current situation with business productivity? And two, share some findings from my research with you in terms of tips for self-help that businesses should consider. A few tips. In terms of the situation, this is not news to anyone. The chart to your left shows that Jamaica is among the weakest of the Caribbean countries in terms of per capita GDP and real growth of GDP. So that's not new. And this was reported last year by the IMF. Interestingly, the IDB last year also said that the region, the Caribbean region, is losing ground to other similar developing states worldwide. So Jamaica is really in the doldrums. When you look at the chart to the right, which shows the top curve, interest rates, again, this is not news to most of you. Interest rates spiraled for a while, and then they came down sharply. But if you look at the bottom chart, especially the red line, which shows real growth of GDP in Jamaica, and the blue line, the world average, you will know that despite the fact that interest rates have come down, the real growth has not picked up. And for those who are economists, I will tell you that what's expected is that if you bring down interest rates sharply, it stimulates the economy. And this has not happened in the case of Jamaica. What this means is that businesses find it hard to generate profitable revenues in Jamaica. That's what it means. Now, how bad is the situation? Well, if you look at corporate Jamaica, chart to your left, as evidenced by the companies on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. The stock exchange started in the early 1969, and over that time, 108 companies have been listed. since February 1969, including 21 that's now on the junior market. And 51 of those companies have reported a loss at some point, and only 28 have recovered. So if you're running the numbers, you would say that there is a 1 in 4 chance of failure if you're on the stock market, and these are supposed to be some of the blue chip companies in corporate Jamaica. If you take a look at the chart to your right, as reported by the annual surveys published by the PIOJ, the number of small firms, micro and small firms, filing GCT returns have declined by some 45% since 2005. Now it means that these companies are either gone out of business or they've retreated to the informal sector. I should tell you that I am on the board of trustees of the Small Business Association of Jamaica, and I can say that more than 80% of the active members of the SBAJ in 2004 are not in business today. They haven't retreated, they're simply out of business. And across the board, the number one reason for business distress is financial hardship. You know we're looking to the small business sector to create jobs. My research, published in several journals, consistently show that there is a strong positive correlation between the age of the small firm and the number of persons it employs. What this means is that despite the fact that the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor says that Jamaica has one of the highest business startup rates in the world, that's not good enough to create jobs. So you've got to keep the doors open. What's also alarming on the right-hand side is that the small business attrition that you're seeing is most severe in the real sectors of the economy, where we are looking for the kind of growth that Dr. Charles Douglas referred to. And one of the hardest hit is manufacturing. Now, I don't have to tell you that for a long time in the recent past, there was a sentiment that, hey, let's not worry about manufacturing because the world is going services. Let's retool to go services to get out of the doldrums. Back in the 1960s, a famous economist called Nicholas Caldor said that there is a strong positive correlation between the real growth of total GDP and the growth of your manufacturing sector. Now, using that first law of Caldor, I did a simple regression analysis of our situation in Jamaica. The top red line is total GDP here, and the blue line is manufacturing. Can you see the correlation? What's happening there is that manufacturing in Jamaica explains nearly 40% of how the economy behaves, supporting Caldor's first law. So we have an option. We have to either fix the problem or find a way to effectively replace manufacturing. Because when it's up, it pulls up the economy. When it's down, it drags it down. And as you can see, manufacturing has been down for quite a long time. In fact, moving from 21% of GDP down to a paltry 7.5%, 8%. The ray of light is in the junior market because 7 of the current 21 companies are manufacturing companies, and since being listed in just a few short years with affordable equity capital, they have been able to not only expand, but employ more people. So the junior market is one indication that manufacturing is not dead. We can and should try to fix it while we do the other things. I want to leave you with some tips in terms of what I feel businesses should do. Because the bottom line is that a business is about a group of people working together towards a common purpose. It is people first when we talk about productivity, not technology and other things. People first. The tips I want to leave you with are as follows. I'm suggesting in the self-help mode that companies, businesses learn from the critical trends, and secondly, move to strengthen business models. What do I mean by learning from critical trends? My research has shown that Jamaican firms tend to over-rely on price to compete. And that is often a race to the bottom. Before you resort to price, look at other options. Can quality work for you? Can convenience work? Can customer service work for you? But sadly, too many businesses rush to play the price game and then collapse. Because that becomes who has the biggest pair of lungs to stay on the water. The second trend is that Jamaican firms tend to over-rely on the Jamaican economy for sales. And that's very interesting because Jamaicans are good at using the internet to purchase what they need, but fall woefully short in using the internet to sell what they have. We've got to do a better job of broadening the customer base to consider potential customers outside of our shores. The third tip from my research is that when I look at small businesses and companies on the stock exchange, the statistics are clear. A business is likely to encounter a non-financial business is likely to encounter cash flow problems if its total debt exceeds 70% of its total assets. Why? Because many of these businesses rely, for example, on giving credit, which is account receivable. It takes time to collect that. Also, because we have the propensity for currency depreciation, by the time you collect the money and turn it, your costs go up. So you've got to make sure that debt doesn't run away with you. And the regression results suggest that irrespective of size, for non-financial businesses, if your debt exceeds 70% of your assets in this country, you could have cash flow problems, which you can't reverse. The final tip from the trend is about how we make decisions and take actions. Jamaican managers and businesses tend to rely very heavily on data analytics. And that's the buzzword these days. Let's talk about business intelligence, data mining, data warehousing, and all the other buzzwords. The fact is, if the future is not like the present or the past, your analytics can't help you. So I suggest that in addition to data analytics, businesses also do some scenario planning. Back in the day, when I was a group general manager, if you engage in scenario planning, you'll be called the Obia man, because it just wasn't done. But certainly, I encourage persons to contemplate the absurd and build that into your contingency planning. In terms of the second major tip, strengthening business models, I have a simple chart there that speaks to what to do from my own consulting practice. It starts with people. You've got to ask 4 basic questions. Firstly, have you got sufficient employee talent and commitment? It doesn't matter how much you've invested in infrastructure and technology. If persons are not committed to go down the road with you, you have lost before you started. If you get past the people hurdle, then you can talk about your other resources and your capabilities in terms of systems. And if that works, you certainly can talk about commercial solutions. Now, what do I mean? Many businesses offer goods and services that are not commercial solutions. Why? Because oftentimes they offer what customers need and not what they demand. And there's a difference, because customers oftentimes ignore what they need, but demand what they want. And this is why so many needs assessments fail, because people need it. but don't buy it. And they want it. It's not a necessity, but they do buy it. Are your goods and services commercially viable? Last but not least, throughput. It makes no sense selling if you can't collect the money. Now, how easy is it today in Jamaica to collect money? I can tell you from my personal experience that the calls are not returned. You turn up unannounced and it's as if it's magic. The person you want to see is not there. It's a nightmare to get the productivity out when it comes to collecting money to turn the business. You have to be creative. So I'll close by saying, from a self-help perspective, I encourage businesses to learn from the critical trends and strengthen their business models. Thank you very much.
Get ready for the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.